And it's BBOR Black Box Online Radio coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxOnlineRadio on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And hello and welcome to the special weekend episode of Black Box Online Radio. My name is Ned DeHaan and I will be your host. Some of you may have seen the recent announcement that I did for the channel that I was going to be doing an episode about the Long Island serial killer this weekend. However, it turns out that it will be done in a different format because, by chance, there is some breaking news in the case. The Long Island serial killer is an unidentified perpetrator who may be operated from 1996 to 2010 or 11 or beyond or maybe before. We simply do not know, and there are a lot of uncertainties that we face in this case. But I follow a page on Instagram called Catchlist, also known as Catch the Long Island Serial Killer, and there was a post this morning that an article came out by Murder Inc., and they more or less say that there was a DNA breakthrough in this mystery, and it involves the prime suspect in the case, John Bittrolf. Now, some people absolutely think that John Bittrolf was not the Long Island serial killer. They have their own suspects. And then there are people like me who had a lot of doubts and reservations about this. But as I said, this came out maybe 13 hours ago on Murder Inc. Corp. is the exact name of the website, but it's referred to as Murder Inc., the name of the true crime page. Murder Inc. exclusive. John Bittrolf's DNA alleged match to the Long Island serial killer. Confidential sources tell Murder Inc. that DNA recovered from one of the Long Island serial killer victims allegedly matches the convicted killer John Bittrolf. The DNA was recovered likely from either Jessica Taylor or Valerie Mack, whose torsos were found in the same spot, near the same spot, in 2000 and 2003. Now, if you'd like to hear more about these stories and the victims, I have episodes on every single one of the Long Island serial killer victims here on this channel. I invite you to like, subscribe if you want to follow along with these true crime discussions. But a brief recap. The Long Island serial killer possibly committed his first crime in 1996 with the murder of the Fire Island Jane Doe. She is often referred to as the first confirmed victim of the list. Not much is known about her, not even her name is known. But two people were out walking and they found a pair of legs that were from an unidentified female. And later on, years later, they found her skull and they were able to generate a composite, but her body had been mutilated. The next victim, that is sometimes on the confirmed list and sometimes not, is the Peaches Jane Doe, also mutilated, and very little is known about her. Then the Long Island serial killer would target Valerie Mack in the year 2000. Are you noticing something about these timelines? Very large gaps in the periods of activity. But Valerie Mack was murdered, and she was dismembered and mutilated, and it was maybe 18 years before they were able to identify her using DNA. The Long Island serial killer would then target his possible next victim, alleged next victim, Jessica Taylor, in 2003. She was easily identified by a tattoo that had been cut up. This ends what some people call the years of the Manorville Butcher. Some people think that the Long Island serial killer was something that was created in 2011 after they were searching for a woman named Shannon Gilbert, and then they discovered a serial killer graveyard, and then by 2011 they had created the name the Long Island serial killer. That's mostly true, except the authorities were very well aware that a serial killer was operating before that. They just didn't know to what extent. They called this person the Manorville Butcher. And already from the introduction to this article here, talking about a DNA match to one of the victims to the convicted killer John Bittrolf, it simply says confidential sources have shared this with a true crime blog. It's really hard to give any type of proper commentary on that because how on earth are we, in the general public, supposed to evaluate this information? A small bird told me or something. I am hopeful that there will actually be some answers, but a big problem is not everyone believes that the Long Island serial killer and the Manorville butcher are even the same person, because after Jessica Taylor was murdered, there are a series of homicides that are committed that are known as the Gilgo IV, the murders of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Bartolome, Megan Waterman, and Amberlynn Costello, which happened, again, about sometimes a year apart, sometimes months apart. So they might get a little bit closer together, but the victims were not mutilated or dismembered in the Gilgo IV killings. In between the first two homicides and the second two homicides, a woman named Shannon Gilbert ran away from a client that she was seeing in Oak Beach on Long Island. His name was Joe Brewer. She was driven there by Michael Pack, and she's very frantic. She calls 911. She's on the phone with 911 for 23 minutes, and she is later on discovered. She also passed away in these events, but some people think Shannon was killed by the Long Island serial killer. Other people do not believe that she was murdered by the Lisk, and that it is just a very strange coincidence. But I would like to discuss more about this particular issue that that is relevant to the breaking news, because firstly, they want to share some stuff about John Bittrolf. Bittrolf lived in the Manorville area near where the torsos of Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor were discovered. 3 male victims of the Long Island serial killer were discovered in the same area. The first found strangled in his underwear only 4 days after Valerie Mack in November of 2000. 3 male victims, though. Maybe, if you've been keeping track of everything that I just said, I was only talking about female victims. Yes, Peaches, Jane Doe, of course, referring to a female victim. Some people even think that Cherry's Jane Doe, who was murdered in 2007, could be a confirmed victim of the Long Island serial killer. But really, there's only one male victim that is strongly considered in most of the sources, and that is the Asian John Doe. That's what people sometimes refer to him as, and all I will share about him is that he was a man who was found in women's clothing, and I don't want to say any more than that because of how people would choose to use terminology and so on. I think that that could be somewhat of a distraction. But 3 male victims of the Long Island serial killer, this is another red flag for the article, because if there is any genuine connection, in theoretical terms, I would expect that that's a very weak possibility that this Long Island serial killer is going after lone females. The Fire Island Jane Doe, Valerie Mack, Jessica Taylor, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Bartolome, Megan Waterman, Amberlynn Costello, all of these victims are lone females. An exception to this would be the Peaches Jane Doe, who was murdered in 1997 because she had a baby with her toddler or infant, and she was definitely older than a newborn, and she was referred to as Baby Doe for years. But let's get back to the article here, talking about how the first male victim was found strangled in his underwear only 4 days after Valerie Mack in 2000. The Suffolk County Police Department refuses to publicly acknowledge their connection to the Long Island serial killer case and has refused to comply with the Freedom of Information Act and release documents identifying the Manorville John Doe found in 2003, which are not exempt from the disclosure under New York State FOIL law. The Suffolk County Police Department hid the fact that the victim was identified for over 6 years while feigning for pleas from the public and for information to solve the case, and to even solve the Long Island serial killer case. Here's something, though, that somebody once told me, and I will share with you. The authorities always have more information than they lead on. They don't give everything away. And a very clear example of this in a serial killer case is the story of the DC snipers, because I lived in West Virginia at the time, but my part of West Virginia wasn't so far from DC, and they're putting out all these news reports saying, be on the lookout for the snipers. They're driving a white van with a roof rack. baloney. It was all made up. The police openly admitted that it was made up, when in reality, the killers were using a blue Chevy Caprice. They even made a movie about that, called Blue Caprice, with Isaiah Washington. And if you'd like to hear more about the DC Sniper story, you can go to my episode here on this channel. In addition to liking and subscribing, you can also just have a listen to some of the other content and visit some of the links here in the description box. Lots of stuff to be shared. But more importantly, I think that there are several red flags in this article. And just to summarize and put everything together, we have no idea who the source is. I think that this author here of Murder Incorporated might be making some connections that are questionable. Who am I to say that they are wrong? Who are we to say that this theory is wrong, that the Long Island serial killer committed a murder 4 days after killing Valerie Mack? It is an unsolved case. It's possible. But I have my doubts about those particular connections. I do not have any doubts that the authorities may be lying to us. Well, once again, my name is Ned DeHaan, and thank you so much for listening to this little breaking news bulletin. And sadly, I'm only sharing a possible connection, but I have hope, and I really do mean that let's just keep an eye out for this, that maybe some way, somehow, there could be some truth that will be coming out, and we will get answers in the Long Island serial killer mystery. But I do want to share one thing with you, though, about the serial killer, convicted murderer, John Bittrolf. There was another post that was shared via the Catch List page on Instagram, which I invite you to follow as well. I don't have any direct affiliation with that one, but I'm just promoting a page that I think has lots of good resources. And they said that, in this article, by someone else, that the Long Island serial killer was most likely John Bittrolf. They just don't have the evidence to convict him of these crimes, or to connect him to these crimes, or to identify him as the killer. And a lot of people are in denial about that, because they don't want to admit that it's just this simple explanation. It's another twisted murderer that went to jail for something else. They want to think that the mystery is going to go on forever, and that the killer could possibly be someone under the radar that was never identified at all, that no one is even thinking about, because they just have this fascination with a killer that could be smarter than law enforcement. I tend to not fall into those categories, because I'm just being skeptical of all suspects and really waiting to find the conclusive pieces of evidence. And if there is a DNA link that we might be learning about in the near future, and that this confidential source is actually telling the truth, and I hope they are, I will absolutely accept the result. And I think we all should, because, it's the true crime world. We actually want the truth at the end of the day. All right, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys over on Instagram, BlackBoxNet88, for the bonus podcast. Until next time.